All right, welcome everyone to week 5 of TCL 76. Like I said before, halfway through, well, maybe more than halfway through with respect to issues. Um, yeah, I can't believe so much time has gone already. All right, so we'll kick this week off with demos. Does anyone want to go first?
We would actually like to go second, if that's okay,
Yeah.
with Sarah and Emma.
Go first.
And this is Emma's first time in a long time presenting with someone, not by herself.
I told her I'm gonna break the curse. I started
Yeah,
it, I'm ending it.
nice. All right, take it away whenever you're ready.
Okay, I can start with presenting here. So our issue is about when the shopping list is empty, we need to display a prompt message to the user, and also this message can serve as a guide to like direct the user start to creating this shopping list. So at this home page, user can start with creating a list. Once it's submitted, we'll direct to the list page. First, it's a prompt to telling the user the list has saved to the database. And then here is the prompt message to tell the user that your shopping list is empty. And what you can do is to go to the manage list to start create a shopping list. So this is about the UI part of this ticket. And Sarah, would you like to talk about the code?
Yeah, sure. Okay, I'll share my screen. Share this one. Okay. Is everyone seeing that right? Yes, okay. All right, so the goal was to make the pop-up show up, and Emma had the idea of using MUI so that we can use their model component. So we made it its own component to pass in. So most of these were already available. We adjusted it so that the button would just be passed
So,
into the
Sarah,
button.
sorry to interrupt. Is anyone else seeing Sarah's screen? I feel like Sarah's video is kind of dropping out as well.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, I think it's a little choppy. I'm not seeing
Yeah, the screen is it's just a started screen sharing, but I'm not actually seeing anything just yet.
Oh no, okay.
Maybe try going
And
and see if that helps with your internet.
what did you say? Sorry.
Maybe try going off camera and see if that kind of helps.
Okay.
Yeah. Sometimes that can help with internet, yeah.
It
Hmm,
did that didn't do anything.
not for me.
Okay, Emma, could you
I
share it?
Yeah, I can share my code and then
Okay.
Yay, technical difficulties.
Yeah.
Always fun.
okay.
All right. So yeah, so if you could scroll a little bit to the bottom. So yeah, so yeah, most of these, obviously these were all available on MUI on their docs, but we adjusted everything so that instead of depending on an on click, it would be so that when the data isn't undefined, we would be able to it would pop up. So the button is more now used so that I would transfer to manage list. So that's what we did here. Oh, it's okay, you could stay here. Yeah. So yeah, the button, instead of using it as a click to turn on and off when it's what's it called? So when state is not state, whether or not we want it open or closed, we don't click the button. The button is now just used to navigate. So we used navigate for that. And then on you can go back to list now. Yeah, and then list, we are passing the model in. Emma will talk about the changes we did, but the idea was so that we are checking for when data is empty and when the user is logged in, so that people who aren't even having an account are not getting this message of you need to make items into your list. Okay. And I think those were like the things that we did. So Emma, you can talk about some changes we did.
Yesterday, we were able to meet up briefly and to adopt Mendes' suggestions. First is to make it reusable for the model. So we make the message as an object. So next time, the model can have new header, prompt message, and button text. So that's how we pass in as a prop to the basic model. And another change is to make the alert message and the prompt message to display at different time. We implemented by using a use effect. We did have some struggle about this because we made a very simple mistake at first. Like we put use effect inside of the return, and we're seeing a number display on the screen. And then later we learned that is actually whatever the number that is actually returned by the set timeout. So we should actually put in the use effect and only have it return once. To set this to be true to display the basic model after the time delayed a certain times. And the other thing that Sarah was able to fix is with Marco's finding a small bug, which is the theme right here. If it's dark mode, the user wouldn't able to see the prompt message. So Sarah and I were able to meet up briefly, and then what we did is inside the model, we should be able to catch what is the current theme. If it's dark, then it's another color. If it's not dark, then we'll go the original color provided from the model, Material UI model. So those are the small bugs we were able to fix in the end. And yeah.
Okay, so it looks good. I guess my first question would be why Material UI or MUI for this issue?
It was because we were thinking that in real life, we see some apps like with this prompt message, it's like just a window, a small window, and we have been using some alert windows in this project. And I have some experience using Material UI, and I think it's very easy to implement, and they provide a lot of native functionalities we can leverage. And that's why we end up using the Material UI.
Okay. And I guess the other question was just in terms of semantics. I've only messed around with Material UI a couple of times, but is the button element the best use of like a semantic element for this? Because it seems like we're just navigating to like a different route, versus a button which should implies, some kind of action or functionality in that sense.
Are you saying that maybe we should use a link, not a button?
Maybe a link, but like I said, I don't know. I don't know the full functionality of Material UI. I would, however, caution at this point just to focus more on the functionality of the app, At this stage, like using an alert is completely fine. Because from sprint 14, you're all gonna be working entirely on UI, you know. So just be mindful of not mindful. Just be wary of introducing entire UI libraries at this stage, just because it may sway the entire direction of the project. And I don't think we need to be focused so much on UI behavior at this point. Just make sure we have the core functionality of the app going for now, and then from sprint 15, you'll go full speed on UI.
Okay, probably Sarah and we can think about using a more suitable label like tag name instead of a button here. And yeah, and I agree that at this point, our main focus should be focusing on the functionality instead of the UI part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just asked about the button as well, just from an accessibility standpoint, is it the best element or component to use in this case? So just keep accessibility in mind when you're building and designing all of these things. Yeah. But good job so far. I had a question for you all. Does anyone else see an error in the console when you all load up the page on first sign in, when it has to display the list or the list of shopping lists? Does anyone get a console error regarding key? Yeah. All right. So my proposal might just be to make a small issue, and we can do that like offline. We'll just do like a small issue on the side, and maybe I could have that addressed once you'll finish on the main issues, just to fix that small bug. All right, Alison or Marcos, go take it away. I know this issue isn't 100% complete, but let's see at least what we have at this point. And yeah.
Marcos is going to run us through a demo real quick.
Yeah, let's go ahead. I'll run through the demo. I'm gonna show what we have. Also gonna show what is wrong and what the bugs are. I think it's pretty important for everybody to see what's going on here. So let me just share my screen. Okay. So everybody can see my screen. Okay.
Marcos, will you zoom in on your browser just a little bit?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Is that good or more? Good. Okay. So our issue was pretty tough, but yeah, it was to have a user mark an item as purchased in the shopping list, and then there were a few other things like them being able to, if it was unchecked for 24 hours, or if it was checked and after 24 hours it would uncheck itself. So there was a few things that we were able to do. So we'll just go through it real quick. When you go to the list, you'll see we had to implement a checkbox next to each of the list items. And so when you check an item, you can, so the checkbox works. So right now we have juice checked, and then it should also update in local storage, showing that it's also checked. So if we go here to local storage and I just checked juice, you can see that it's true right now. So that's working. But we had issues when it came to managing like states within localhost and in Firebase. But if you see here, right now you see that juice is checked, but I'm going to simulate it being 24 hours beforehand by changing the date last purchased. So if we change it to 24 hours beforehand and we go ahead and update that, should automatically uncheck juice. But for some reason it didn't there. I don't know why. It should have. Let me try it again, maybe with one of these. Like maybe let me try soda. I'm not sure why it's working. It was working earlier, but let's go ahead and do that. We update. So now soda should be unchecked. There we go. Not sure why that wasn't working. But at the same time, you can see, so it's now says false. So that is actually what's going on here. The local storage is correct. But the problem is in Firebase, our is checked is still true. So there's still an issue there. And at the same time, I don't know if you noticed, it also updated total purchases, which that's not something we want to happen when it unchecks itself. So yeah, there's still running issues with this. Hopefully we can get some help with that. But other than that, that was pretty much it for the UI. Just basically adding a checkbox, and then we're still working on the little bugs that are inside of the code. So yeah, you can take it away, Allison.
Yeah, so I think like some other things we wanted to highlight were we wanted the user to be able to check off an item. We wanted the date last purchase to be updated to that timestamp when someone checks off the checkbox. And we wanted the total purchases count to increment by one to simulate whenever a user purchases an item, right? So we were able to do all of those things. And then we realized, Devin, you made a comment about how if a user accidentally checks a checkbox, we don't necessarily want total purchases to count that time. Like that increment shouldn't happen when a user checks the checkbox. So then I thought maybe that total purchases should increment by one at the same time it unchecks itself after 24 hours. That logically makes sense to me. And that would be able to live within one function. Like if the time, because I think the Marcos did some genius stuff with timestamps and was able to figure out that whole world. But it made sense to me, like if we don't want it to count when something's purchased, when the checkbox is accidentally done, it makes sense to have it increment up after 24 hours, because that was the point of the unchecking after 24 hours, was to communicate, oh, you checked it off, now I can restart it. And then another thing we ran into, well, I realized I'm not sharing my code. 1 second. Sorry, everyone. Okay. So we realized that, and Mindy pointed this out to us, we needed it all to live within local storage because we didn't want that 24-hour like timer. I hesitate to say timer, but the timestamp, we wanted that to live on even when our apps we didn't have our code pulled up. So that was an interesting transition we had to figure out. So we mainly worked within list item and the Firebase JS. I'll go ahead and start, I guess, in Firebase JS. So everything right now just kind of falls within lines 190 to 209. Emma, last week you pointed out like needing to invest some time in studying Firebase. So that's kind of how I spent my week. But yeah, figuring out like how update item needed to be incorporated. And it kind of lives in here. Yeah, updating the data, updating a specific row, updating when there's a certain thing happening. And so in this case, we wanted it to be when an item is checked, we wanted that date last purchase to update. And then let's see, in list item, we have, this is kind of where all of our state is. And if we want to get into the bugs, I think that it has something to do with where and how many times state is being changed and where. But yeah, Marcos, do you want to kind of talk about like how you use effect to calculate the dates and calculate like when the app knows an item is past 24 hours?
Yeah, I think I can speak on it a little bit. So let's see. Yeah, I just kind of like had to get so get the times all calculated, put them in variables, and then basically just return it in like an equation basically. And then once you return that, that should give you the time in 24 hours before. And then after that, we use the use effect to try and update um, everything at the same time that's happening. But there's, like I said, there's still things that we're trying to figure out. I honestly tried to spend a lot of time outside of us meeting together to try and figure this out, but I really couldn't understand and figure out what was going on. But so we're gonna hopefully get that figured out here. But yeah, other than that, I mean, we just kind of render the checkbox at the end there. You can see we update list path and all the states and everything that's supposed to be updated. Um, but yeah, I'm still honestly I'm a little bit confused with what's going on, and so yeah, there's still a lot to work on.
Yeah, so I feel like that's where we're at now. I I feel like we're leaving it in a place where all of the, like, in my mind, all of the requirements are met, but I think after like tweaking it more, we kind of made some more problems for ourselves. But yeah, I think that's kind of where we're at now. And then I think the path moving forward is figuring out um how to have the date last purchase and total purchases fields update when they're supposed to, and like when it makes most sense for the user. Um, and then Devin, you weren't able to check the box right away the first time. You had to check it again for it to actually work. Um, and that was the last thing we wanted to figure out. But it kind of seems like it's all connected. So that's kind of where we're at this morning.
Yeah, that's where we're at. I was also reading a little bit online, trying to figure out some things, and something that came up, which I've heard of, but I don't have much experience with, is like a race condition. Is it saying that was a possible issue? So maybe that's the problem, and maybe we can get like a discussion going about that. But yeah, that's kind of new to me. Like I've heard that before, that term used, but yeah, that'd be nice to maybe get a little explanation, or maybe that's one of the reasons why. So, yep.
All right. All right. First off, let me say this. If you get stuck or you feel stuck, feel free to reach out for help. It is a team project. Throw it out there, brainstorm. You know, do your rubber duck debugging if you have to out loud. Sometimes just having more eyes on the problem can help you get to a solution quicker, right? So don't try to work in isolation just because we have pairs. It still is a much bigger team than that. Next up, uh, I see the logic behind the suggestion that you had, Alison, about making that change 24 hours after. However, we will run into issues when we get to issue 11 with that one, because it does actually require count, as you will see, of the total number of purchases made. I guess the question that I had was, first off, do we need to keep track of the is check state in local storage? Like, what is the value of that?
I think, Marcos, you might have a better answer to this, but to my understanding, the is checked really helped us track the step required for total purchases and date last purchase to update. Like, we were really focused on, and I think what you're saying, Devin, is we need to like make it less so about what the state of checked is, like, because in my mind, like, we couldn't have everything fall on whether or not someone like clicks it, but it matters like what the state of the checkbox is,
Right.
if that
And
makes sense.
yeah, so does the state of the state of the checkbox is mostly local, right? Is it mostly on the client side, or does it have to also be tied to some property on the like in Firestore as well? Because it seems more related to time.
Mm,
So then could the state of the checkbox on the UI be based on something related to the time, which would be date last purchased in this case?
Yeah, I think that might. Yeah, because I thought it was more towards leaning like in Firestore, or it would rely on Firestore, but you guys
Well, we will get date last purchase from Firestore.
right.
So then could the state of check just be tied to that date then within Firestore? Because it seems like it 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 gets straight to that instead of having to add a conditional is checked variable and then have that stored in local storage as well as on Firestore. So I'm just trying to find like a simple solution for
Yeah.
this particular case. And then maybe we could think about the edge cases like unchecked. So I think Alison had mentioned in the comment earlier, maybe just have it such that once the box is checked, the user can't uncheck it yet
Okay.
for 24
Yeah.
hours. And then after 24 hours, it becomes unchecked.
But I think that is to bring up your point earlier, like if a user accidentally checks it, then
Yeah.
it's like, well, then it's you can't do anything
Right.
about it.
So I
Yeah.
think that bit, so that kind of falls outside of the scope of the main issues that we have, but it is probably something that we could add as a feature, maybe a nice to have coming close to the end of the project. Because I do feel the logic for that might be a bit more complicated to implement right now.
Yeah.
I don't want to take away from the main 14 issues that we have right now. Yeah.
I agree.
All right. So just some ideas to throw about. But yeah. All right. So we're about half 11 here. Mindy, we have your leading module to go through. So y'all have kind of been doing agile, but let's hear from Mindy about this
Yeah.
whole thing.
So when I saw that I was doing Agile, I was excited because I have opinions about Agile. So we'll see. This should be a fun discussion. Before we get started on that, I'd love to hear what is your what are all y'all's experience with the software engineering idea of Agile? Is it something you've heard of? Is it something you've not heard of? Have you done it? Do you feel like you've done it? Do you know anything about it? Like, where is your level of understanding on that? I see
Um,
nods, but yeah.
I think in my bootcamp, they purposely introduced Agile to us as a course.
How is it?
Um, and then from what I learned, it seems like a stand-up meeting on Monday, and people talk about the progress and sharing what are the blocks. If anybody can contribute like about how to solve that blocks, they can step in to help. If anything that seems like need to be changed, like the trajectory of the projects need to be changed, and during the agile time, they can talk about what could be done. That's my basic understanding about agile.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think going off of Emma, in my boot camp that I took during our capstone project, it was a 4-person group project, and we would meet every morning and have a stand up, and we would talk about, our blockers, talk about like what we got done, talk about like next action items, and we would kind of just collaborate a lot like what we do during this time. And it was fun to like kind of solve the problem in real time. Like, oh, I think especially with blockers, it's like, oh, if this is kind of something that's happening, and then it kind of creates new things that come up for us to solve. That was kind of like the project management piece of it. But yeah, it wasn't like a entire course, like Emma said. It was more just kind of like, this is kind of what you do, figure it out.
Okay. Cool. That gives me a good idea of kind of where we're at. So I'm gonna go ahead and start sharing my screen. And if I can find the share button, it's the bright green one. There we go. All right. So before I get into this one, I want to share this because I feel like it's very accurate. There's a lot of definitions out there about what Agile is, and people throw it around thinking it's one thing, but it's not. And I really love Agile, but I love the very, very pared down version of Agile. And I want to talk about, like, first of all, before we get into what exactly it is, I want to talk about a little bit about the importance of it. So a lot of software engineering culture can come back to the philosophy behind how a project is managed and how work gets done. And so, there is a lot of importance to how this plays out. When you're first starting in your career, you'll have likely very little say in how your company does things. And then eventually you'll be able to build some more, have more experience. You can speak to higher, like, engineering leadership and that sort of thing. But the philosophy behind how you do software engineering can really impact the culture of the company and can impact your day-to-day really heavily. So yeah. And this is a very, very big topic. So we're going to get into, like, just kind of some basics of it, though. So what is Agile? Agile, when it comes down to it, is actually just a set of values here. And the values are individuals and interactions over process and tools. So I'm just gonna leave it at that. Working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. That is the Agile Manifesto. That is the core of it, the core tenets right there. And it's not saying necessarily that the things on the right are not important. There is value in those, and there's important, like, I love comprehensive documentation. I love it. It's great. But valuing working software over that, it is more important than that. And all of this comes from this really funny website that looks like it's straight out of the 90s. And it's great. So they have it listed here, right? That's exactly what I just read. These are the people who kind of put it together. And there's some, famous people in here. Kent Beck has written, a handful of these folks have written a lot of different books about how to do software engineering. I really like Kent Beck. He's one of my favorites. If you ever want to find something about Kent Beck, I actually have a book of his literally right here. It's a good book. It's called Tidy First. It's good fun. Definitely a worth a read, and it's a pretty short book too. So if you have some time, anyway, as an aside. I think one downside that I always think about in terms of Agile Manifesto that I think is worth noting is the fact that these are all men. Like, it would have been nice if they had, included some women in their discussions and had that, but that happens. But yeah, so this is where it comes from. They also have this 12 principles of Agile software, definitely worth reading, and just kind of getting an understanding of what this looks like in practice. A lot of these you won't necessarily interact with too much until you actually get into a position. But yeah, so the basic idea here is that it's a framework. We have all of this, and it comes from, and let's give you some history. Back in the day, right? We talk about software back again in the 90s. They had and earlier they had software that came on CDs, right? So you had a final product that you had to complete, and that final product went out, and there wasn't anything you could do about it after it went out, right? But you're working up to a final release that you ostensibly deploy once. And that had a program management called waterfall. So you would do this part, and then you would move on to this part, and then you move on to this part, and then you move on to this part. So it's like building a car. You would build all the pieces of the car, and then you'd have a car, right? And the car would get you where you need to go. So That's waterfall. Agile is a little bit different, and it ends up looking a little bit more like this, where you do a little bit of this, a little bit of everything, deploy it, a little bit of everything, deploy it, a little bit of everything, deploy it. Like you're getting that iterative thing going on, and where you're constantly giving value to the customer. So coming back to, I clicked into this. Coming back to, oh no, it is in the principles of, they talk about delivering value. Deliver working software frequently from a couple of weeks to a couple of months with a preference to the shorter time scale. Like you're delivering value to your customers all the time is kind of the idea here. One explanation that I love about this is they talk about this image right here a lot in agile spheres. So like I said with the car, right? Back in the day, you give a CD. It's like building a car. You build all of the things slowly until you have the car, and then you deploy it and you give it out once. A lot of agile ends up looking more like, okay, we know that we want to get to a car eventually, but we're going to pick the smallest little thing that we can do here. And maybe that looks like a skateboard first. Maybe we have a couple wheels and it gets us to where we go, but it doesn't get us there fast. It doesn't get us there with low effort, but it's getting us closer. It's delivering some customer value. And then as you work, you're iterating and delivering more and more and more and more value. So that's kind of the history there. We have this history of waterfall. We're now in a new sphere of the internet, new sphere of computer technology in general, right? Where we have this ability to deploy more frequently and get slowly added value. So that's where Agile kind of comes from. And it's this framework, right? Where you have these large products, they're complex, there's a lot there. It's an ability to make sure that you can adapt to change as you need to quickly and change that value or change what you're focusing on frequently. That's right, you're agile, you're moving around, you're agile. That's where it comes from, right? So then we talk about Scrum. And Scrum is the thing that most people kind of start to associate with Agile. And it's kind of what I heard from y'all too, is like the idea, there's a lot of frameworks that kind of help people do Agile. And Scrum is one of those frameworks. I actually think it's a little bit funny. Sometimes I have a bit of like, well, but it's a process and a tool, right? Scrum in and of itself is a process and a tool, and we put it pretty highly up on that list of this is important. But is it as important? Well, it's more important. Individuals and interactions are more important than the processes and the tools. So I would argue that maybe it doesn't need quite as much focus as we sometimes put on it. But it can be a helpful tool. It can definitely be a helpful process. It can definitely be a helpful tool. So just as making sure that we value the individuals and interactions over them. So talking a little bit about Scrum, Scrum is a framework within which people can address complex problems while productively and creatively delivering products of the highest possible value. It's supposed to be lightweight, it's supposed to be simple to understand, and it can be difficult to master. And like I mentioned, Scrum is a type of Agile practice, but Agile itself is not just Scrum. It's a bigger conceptual understanding and bigger philosophy in general. Some things you'll see in Scrum, sometimes, but not always. Everybody does Scrum a little bit differently. So you'll see different iterations of this across different companies. But you might have a product owner, and that person is responsible for maximizing the value of the product and the work of the development team. You'll have a Scrum Master who kind of facilitates the process of the sprint cycle and oversees Scrum ceremonies like retrospectives, stand-ups, that sort of thing. And then you'll have the development team who's actually doing the implementation, and they're the ones estimating work and owning the quality of the product. And then beyond that, you'll have some interested parties like internal, external stakeholders, customers, of course, other cross-team partners, that sort of thing. Yeah. So another tool that is often used within Scrum here is user stories. And it's a user story is a tool. Again, it's just another tool that we have in our tool belt. You can use it to kind of, oh, my son's here. Do you want to say hi? They're here, yeah. Hello. I might actually take just a second, get him set up on a device. Devin, do you want to share your experience with Scrum for a minute and Agile in general?
Yeah, I can, but I don't have that. I don't have that much experience in terms of formal Scrum. You know, it has just been let's go through the agile methods. Uh, but I feel like it could get overly complicated. Just, just getting tied up in processes and like it should be this and it should be this and it should be this, like so much so that it could take away just from the actual work,
Yeah,
you know.
agree. Yeah, great. So yeah, so user stories can help you like focus on what needs to get done. It can help you focus on how you creating tickets, how you're creating work. And it's just this understanding of approaching a problem. Oh, thinking about it like as a specific person, I want to do a specific thing so that some sort of benefit can show up. And I do generally love the approach of user stories. Again, I feel like it can often be a little bit heavy to do it as a like we always do user stories. It can feel like a bit of a heavy process, but I love the idea of focusing on the what, who, and why, and not necessarily the how. So a lot of times tickets when you're creating them, you can get stuck in saying, okay, we're going to do this thing, and this is how we're going to do it exactly. But more often than not, when you're building software, you can start with this idea of like, okay, I'm going to do it this way. And then you start doing it and you're like, that doesn't make any sense. Right? So the ability to change how you're going to do things. And I think user stories helps you build in that mentality of, I don't know exactly how I'm going to do this. And I might need to change my plan very quickly. I think that's really helpful. I'm looking at the time, so I'm going to skip through some of the rest of that. We do some Scrum here at Collab Lab. And our mentors are kind of taking on the role of Scrum Masters. We have this set of tickets and we can talk about what they are included or what are included in them and what needs to happen. And then are here as partners along with you as you're working through them. So we do have a weird thing of we already have all the tickets figured out. So you don't get a full insider's view of like, okay, we know we need to get to this car eventually. Here's how we're going to get to the car. But yeah, there's a little aspect of that in there. And then of course we have our weekly syncs, and can act as a ceremony where we're practicing retros and that sort of thing. Yeah, I think one of the main takeaways that I would want to leave you with is mostly just that Agile is more than Scrum, and that there is a lot of value in understanding how and why the processes are created at the places that you work. Like definitely think about that and ask questions and try and figure that out, because I think if you ever have a say in it, being able to kind of nudge your company into different paths can be very helpful for the culture of the company, and the culture of your team and that sort of thing. Yeah, there's a lot there, and you can really dive deep into it and get nerdy about it. Something I wanted to also, I'll share this in the channel. Friend of mine did this thing that's related to a lot of the discussion about process and how heavy process can be. And he talks about making that process lighter and through a thing called group programming or mom programming. I love group programming. I think there's a lot of value in it, and he talks about it in depth here and like how it can be helpful in that. So I might share this with y'all. It also talks about like it kind of goes through, he talks about like he takes this idea in this clip about what some piece of software that's being built, and he says, okay, when there's this situation that comes up with a user story, and he talks about the flow of like what traditional Scrum can look like in kind of a very process heavy Scrum perspective. And then he takes it down and eventually like makes it much shorter and a much faster iteration through some just different discussions. So if it's at all interesting to you to talk about that kind of thing, I'll share this in the channel and y'all can take a look. I also found it valuable for me when I watched this early on in my career, and I found it valuable just because I had my own experience of what developing in my team looked like. And I didn't experience a lot of like I had never had a Scrum Master. I still have never had a Scrum Master. And so I'm like, I don't even know what that is. And he just kind of talks about that a little bit. And it's helpful to me to have that example. So with that, I'm going to leave the rest of the 10 minutes here for Devin. Oh, before that, actually, I should ask what questions you have. I just sat and monologued for a little while. So what questions do y'all have?
Not so much a question, but more of a reflection. It's interesting that like after your presentation, like realizing I was definitely more in a Scrum environment, and I like the like connection of Scrum is agile, but not all agile is Scrum. I think that like really locks into my brain.
Yeah. People definitely, it's a very common like, oh, we're doing agile. Are you? Sometimes Scrum leads to agile, but sometimes it doesn't too. Like both and. We had at New Relic, they switched over to using Scrum from Kanban is another process that people use often. And I actually personally like Kanban a little bit more. It has more flexibility and built into it, I feel. But they're like, everybody has to do exactly this. You have to have 2 week sprints exactly, and they have to start on this day and end on this day, and you have to have this many ceremonies, and you have to have and I'm like, I feel like this is contradictory to everything that goes in that Agile manifesto. Just throwing that out there. Don't think this is the correct way to go. So.
I was just gonna say I found it interesting because I like the agile model of having something done each time. It's making me think about projects that I'm building or have built and how I struggle to find out where is like the most simple version I can just build, but it just keeps getting complex. So I'm wondering like if I can use that back end, a database back end, front end way of slowing it down and seeing what happens with that. It's really cool.
I actually just even still like I had created some tickets for my team, and I was getting ready for this presentation and I read that MVP thing again, and the skateboard car thing. And I was like, oh yeah, actually one of these tickets, I should probably break into 2 tickets. That way I can deliver that part first, because that would work by itself. So it's a good reminder, and it's something to easily forget and get caught up and just move in without thinking about it.
Right. Speaking of user stories, let's get into this week's issues. All right. All right. So this week we have issues 10 and 11. We're gonna have Sarah and Marcus working on issue 10. So, and also note the wording for how these issues are actually written. I've actually found that framing your issues as a user story helps define what you actually need to get done. So sometimes maybe just flipping it around and thinking of it from a user's perspective helps develop things like the summary and also the acceptance criteria. So always feel free to refer to, these issues as just like a template for how you would write your own. All right, so issue number 10, as a user, I want to be alerted when I'm entering an empty item or an item that's already on my list. So users should be able to add an empty item to the list, which I think we have some of that functionality already in. Or they should also be able to add the same item twice. So if they try to do this, we need to show them an error message that explains the problem. This way will prevent some clutter in their lists. So the acceptance criteria. Users should be shown an error if the user tries to submit an empty item. There should be shown an error if the user tries to submit an item that is identical to an existing item. For example, if the list contains apples and the user tries to add apples, there should be shown an error message if the user tries to submit a new item that matches an existing name with punctuation and casing normalized. So, for example, if the list contains apples and they try to submit some version of apples, be it varied casing or maybe even something like a space, there should be shown some notice that, this is possibly a duplicate item. And the user's original input is saved in the database. So there are a couple of ways on how to approach this task. Like I was saying before, if you're not sure, throw it out there, for the mentors or your fellow teammates, if you just want to be able to brainstorm. Any questions on this one?
Yeah, what does it mean by user's original input is saved? Does it mean like if it's not matching?
It should be that, I suppose, once it is a valid item, then it should be saved.
Okay.
All right, and issue 11, which should be Emma and Allison. All right. So as an item, I want my estimated next purchase date to be computed at the time of my purchase, or at the time my purchase is recorded in the database. So the app can learn how often I buy different items. So this is where the total number of purchases come in as well. So in order to advise future users about when to purchase things, the app needs to be able to calculate that guess and store it as a future date. The calculate estimate function from the Collab Lab shopping details module will help us know how many days in the future a purchase should happen. In order to use calculate estimate, we need to know how many days have passed since the item was last purchased. So the acceptance criteria for this one: when the user purchases an item, the item's date next purchase property is calculated using the calculate estimate function and saved to the Firestore database. Date next purchased is saved as a date and not a number. A get days between dates function is exported from util/date.js and imported into Firebase.js. And this function should take two JavaScript dates and return the number of days have passed between them. All right, so that is this here. So you'll actually have to write that function here and export it into Firebase.js. All right, notes. So working with Firestore's dates. Firestore returns dates as special objects called timestamps. You'll need to convert the timestamp to a JavaScript date in order to work with it and complete this feature. The timestamp object has a toDate method, and you'll have to refer to the Firestore docs for more on that. All right, calculating the time between JavaScript dates. So dates in JavaScript tend to be very tricky, but as a hint, all date objects have a get time method, which you all have used in last week's issues. Calculating the next purchase date. So the Collab Lab module, it should already be installed in the project. And this module exports a calculate estimate function. So calculate estimate accepts 3 arguments, and they are in order. First off, the previous estimate, which is a number. So that's the last estimated purchase interval. The days since last purchase also number. So these are the number of days that have passed between the last purchase date and now. And you have to figure out how to calculate this argument. And then total purchases, which is also a number, which is the total number of purchases made for the item. So this will be the value that is retrieved from Firestore. Given this information, calculate estimate returns a whole number indicating the number of days until the user is likely to make that next purchase. Yeah. So a bit more tricky, but not impossible. But this one probably will rely on issue number 9 being completed, just because we need to have the total number of purchases. All right. Any questions for this one? All right. If not, throw them out into Slack. Yeah. Expect some questions later on. I would say try to prioritize closing off issue numbers 9 as soon as, and then get working on these as soon as possible. Because these issues are getting a bit more complex, if possible, please try to front load the week and get some of this done, so that way we have, the second half of the week just to go through peer reviews and mentor reviews, in case we find things like bugs or things that need to be fixed. Yeah. Right. Well, I guess that's it for this week's Weekly Sync. Happy coding, everyone, and have a good week.
Bye, y'all.
Thank
Bye.
you.